Welcome back to our discussion of the book called The Community, The Life Jesus Wants for His People. It feels like we've talked about this topic a lot. We're on chapter 49, and it's entitled Hospitality. And I think we've really covered many aspects of hospitality in this series, but there's something interesting here that I think is worth considering. The chapter is by Christine D. Pohl, who describes her experience of living in a small community several years ago where they really tried to practice radical hospitality. They tried to welcome everyone who came. They were haunted by memories of the Holocaust and how people didn't show hospitality to Jewish people during that time, and as a result, so many died. And how they felt they could never allow that to happen again. So very laudable sentiments, and what they tried to do, I think, was wonderful. The problem was, as she describes, the community burned out.
Yeah, and you mentioned that we've covered this a lot, and I think it is an interesting thing to consider that hospitality is woven throughout the gospel, and you can't part it from serving Christ. Like, that is how you demonstrate your love to Jesus, is showing hospitality. And also, I could really relate to Christine's struggle with what are the boundaries, what are the limitations of hospitality, because obviously we are not divine creatures. We don't have an endless supply of ability to work or just extend ourselves without burning out and suffering mental collapse. So that tension is in each of us. It's in our community. But we just do our best and try to address the needs, first and foremost, to the people we've committed our lives to in full community, but then also not just to live selfishly and in a satisfied, complacent state. Of course, what this chapter brings to mind for me always is the Holy Family and the birth of Jesus.
I was thinking the same.
How, the innkeeper, that motif of being turned away again and again, not just once, and then finding a stable, I don't know, that always kind of hits my heart pretty hard in thinking about hospitality. Right.
And yet that is the heart of the Christmas story, the fact, if they would have found hospitality, would it have the same power? Would the story have the same effect on us today?
And I hadn't thought of that. That's a great point.
I think the story, what the story tells us, is that Jesus is willing to go the lowest way, and that ultimately we also have to be willing to go the lowest way. But I think this tension that you describe, is in every aspect of trying to follow Jesus.
That's true.
In trying to live out the Sermon on the Mount. We will never be enough. We're never going to be able to do enough to live as be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, how do we deal with that reality? Do we deal with it by becoming depressed, or is that a challenge to lean on grace and realize that we are in need of grace, and what attitude we should have? I think I remember reading, it's actually from the Muslim tradition. There's this Muslim mystic called Al-Ghazali, and he was writing about one of the pillars of Islam called zakat, which is charity, and he writes, one's giving should be done with a sense of shame at one's meanness in holding back the rest of one's wealth from God. So basically, even when you're giving hospitality like these people were trying to do, should not be done with a sense of pride, a sense of like, here's a gift I'm giving you. It should be done in the knowledge that we'll never give enough, and we should have humility about that, and then realize also it's not about how much hospitality we offer. It's not about compiling a year-end report of how many thousands of homeless people or refugees we sheltered, which would all be about our own glory, but it's about how we do that one
I agree
act of hospitality.
Yeah, And I also think it's really interesting thinking about this concept in the context of community. We have amazing guidelines that are just naturally in place because the chapter spends a lot of time talking about guidelines and boundaries and how some of those are distinct and some of those are quite hidden. But in community, if you have full trust for one another, I could also be like, hey, Rich, you're probably extending yourself a little too much here. And maybe, you need to take a moment for yourself or, go spend some time in nature. And we can care for each other in that way. So we can see when someone's maybe not really having guidelines in place that will, I don't know if that makes sense, but protect
absolutely.
them. So I think that is actually, you can show more hospitality in that way. And that's also another gift of showing hospitality within a community to each other, but also to the refugee, to the homeless, to those that are struggling.
Very, very true. Just to be clear, our community, the Bruderhof, does have an open door. That we've always had an open door to strangers. However, I think we've learned over the years, what Christine talks about in this chapter, the importance of boundaries. So when someone asks to visit our communities, we'll start with a correspondence first to make sure that the reason they're coming is makes sense and is in line with what we're trying to do here, and then we'll suggest a shorter visit, maybe a day or a couple days, and not just jump into a long-term situation of someone living in our communities, and that really seems to work. Of course, this is always flexible, and of course we want to be responsive when there's a direct need. For someone who needs housing or just a place to, get a breather. But there's different ways we can do that, also working together with other organizations. We work together with a local nonprofit here to provide housing for people who are in financial straits. And so it's not so much that a question of, let's invite all these people into our houses, into our community context where we're actually trying to live out a vision of God's kingdom, but at the same time being responsive to the needs and giving, financial assistance or
and also letting that affect us and not just holding it at arm's length. It's not a contradiction to what you said, I don't think, but this chapter does make a good point that extending hospitality, and if you're genuinely concerned about the needs of strangers, it requires a certain amount of courage and willingness to take on some risks. So I think we also are constantly discussing it and don't have like a rote answer.
No.
Obviously, I remember a couple years ago, the large refugee crisis in Lesbos. As a church, we grappled with that and felt the impact of that and wanted to send people to help out with that. So it's just definitely going to always be an ongoing dialogue, and I think that's good. It's good to struggle with that.
Right, or even more recently with the, with the breakdown in the United States involvement in Afghanistan and the huge flood of refugees. That was a place where each of our communities felt, we really should take in a family and give them housing at or near one of our communities and help them get a start in life. So, but again, that's one family out of, or whatever it was, 5 to 10 families out of, and it's always a drop in the bucket. You're never going to do enough, be enough. And I think the best thing is to accept that with joy and lean on grace and be thankful for every chance we're able to have a meaningful encounter.
Right, and never quit. Keep going.
Okay, that's enough for this week. We'll see you next week as we discuss chapter 50. Welcome.